Hi, it's Heather again from Explore Nature's Bounty. Just wanted to mention how important this sign is to showcase the Dobson hiking trail when it was actually established in 1960, and how there might have been a handful of people, of experts, that actually hiked all the way from here to Fundy National Park. But I really encourage beginners, beyond beginners, to really get out and explore what's out here on the Dobson Trail, because this is actually part of the Fundy Biosphere region. And if you haven't checked out all the trails and all the things that you can do in this region, you're missing out, because there is so much that you may or may not know, and you're missing out if you miss out on this beautiful season of, look, it's snowing, it's beautiful out on the trail.
Welcome to the Winter Carnival for 2022. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of the Wabanaki peoples, and that this territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. We wish we could join together in person, and in fact there are a few in-person events with limited capacity that you can check out on the Town of Riverview's website, but to give everyone a chance to join in Winter Carnival, we have a virtual snowshoe with Heather to help you identify some of the native trees that we have on the Dobson Trail. I'm Ben Cummings from the Fundy Biosphere, and before we get to Heather and Raven, who went out on the Dobson Trail last week for a little exploration, I wanted to tell you the importance of staying safe when you're out exploring. Now, this time of year, the sun will set a little sooner than you expect, and it might be colder, or the temperature might dip a little more than you're expecting it to. So wearing layers is paramount. Having a flashlight or a headlamp, as you can see that I have there, and wearing a bunch of layers is huge to keep you warm. Your phone battery may die as well, so it is a good idea to set your voicemail to where you're going to be or where you're trying to be, and make sure as many people know where you're going, where you're headed, and where you're supposed to be afterwards, because there's nothing worse than you getting stuck either after dark or getting stuck on a trail out in the woods. Regardless, enjoy. The stars out tonight are absolutely beautiful, so enjoy the outdoors as much as possible. Get out, get some exercise. The trails around the Fundy Biosphere region and around Riverview are incredible, so get out and check them out. And if you can get away from the city and check out these stars like I see them tonight, you'll be spoiled.
You can't come into the forest and not hug a tree and be grateful we have these majestic species in our forest. Love it.
If you would like to play along, the Fundy Biosphere has an app called the Forest of the Future tool, available at this web address, and it can help you ID all sorts of trees. And if you're planning on planting some in the springtime, you can even find what best native tree will fit your location specifics. Now, without any further ado, let's join Heather on the Dobson.
That's our native hare. Some people call him a rabbit, and he's white, of course, this time of year. And then these ones that have two, that's a squirrel. So that's probably a red squirrel that we may actually see on the trail in here today. So, see if I can pull this towards you. So this is an evergreen, or we call them conifers, and conifers are trees that have needles. So of course they're different than our hardwood species, because in the winter, hardwoods lose their leaves. This is actually a hemlock, and what's kind of cool about hemlock is it was used, or the inner bark was used of hemlock, to stain the Army's uniforms, because it has a purple dye in it. So a lot of hemlocks were used when they were going to war or pre-war, because they could use the dye that naturally came from the inner sap of the hemlock tree. So that's kind of cool. We're going to see lots of stuff, and we haven't even started. Okay, so of course this is a hardwood, although he's not alive because he has no top. But this hardwood, he's a white birch, and what's really cool about the white birch is they get these when they die. It's called a polypore. So it's an actual mushroom species that grows on the side of white birch. And in the summer, fall, you can take those off, and you can actually boil them and make a tea out of them that's really, really high in iron. So that's kind of something to look for. It's too late in the season now. They've got pores that are coming out, so they're not fresh. But in the summer, fall, you can pick them and make a really, really nice tea, or you can dry them and use them for another purpose. But tea is what I like for them, just because they have that strong iron flavor. And because it's kind of a bland taste, I put honey in because I like the taste of honey. But they're always complementing a white birch species. So this one is one that we have to look up. So if we look up in this balsam fir, you're going to see sort of a mass that looks like a mass of branches and so on that's at the top of the tree. This is called a witch's broom. And what's really cool about these, and it's kind of an indicator of something going on, is the trees are so smart. Everybody thinks trees just stand there. What do they do? But if you really study trees, like I have for 50 some years, 40 years, whatever, you learn to pay attention to what the trees are doing. And what happens when a tree is under stress, it will grow limbs and grow limbs and grow limbs to try to protect itself from dying. And what happens when it grows those limbs, though, it makes a really nice home for red squirrels, possibly gray squirrels, which we now have in our province. And they'll hide seed and cones and nuts in those, and those will become or can become their home in the winter because they're protected. So they'll hide stuff not only in the ground, which of course you'll see squirrels digging for nuts in the ground, but they'll use those as a home to hide things. So those are called witch's broom. I don't know how they got that name, but it's kind of cool to see those because sometimes you'll see evidence of the animals running up the tree to put that something in their stash. Another species that is native to the Acadian forest, he's called the jack pine. So he's a member of the pine species. Very, very tall. When they're small, they're quite limby and they kind of grow quite crooked. But once they get old like this guy, I mean, he's got 83 years saying there with a pretty good diameter. He's pretty nice and straight. And actually the bark of the pines are very scaly. So when we look back at the video of the bubble tree, it's very smooth but with bubbles, where the pine trees is very flaky and some really deep type of furrow type bark, it's called. So that's a jack pine. If we had something closer, I could show you the needles, because you can tell a jack pine not only by its bark, but all species actually you can tell by their bark, you can tell by their bud, and you can tell by their actual needles or leaves what kind they are. Oh wow, here's a nice white pine. Ooh. So we're coming across another beautiful, sort of majestic species of softwood, and this is called white pine. And we may be able to find his needles as we go on, but what's really cool about the white pine is he has 5 needles that come out of each umbo on his branch. And how we can remember white pine, W-H-I-T-E. So that's a quick way to remember white pine if you don't know him by his bark or by his needles. When you actually have those needles in your hand and count them, that's how you can remember that it's a white pine. And this is a really majestic white pine. He's probably 60 feet or more tall, a really nice size diameter, and these guys will live for up to 200 years if, they're not damaged by wind or ice storms. They're a beautiful, beautiful pioneer species for the Acadian forest, the white pine. Okay, so this is kind of cool as we're coming up to it. It's a dead poplar. I'll walk towards it, which has a live one beside it. You can call it aspen. You can call it, there's different species of aspen. It can be large tooth, short tooth aspen. But what's really interesting is you'll see how obviously something has been pecking at this dead tree. And when you see this, it's an indicator of some sort of, could be a porcupine, but porcupine don't like hardwoods. This is actually woodpecker damage. And sometimes you'll see, depending on the size of the holes, I don't see really, really deep holes other than farther up. But if it was our largest of the woodpecker species, he's called a pileated woodpecker, the holes that he makes are at least this much in diameter and probably this deep, because his actual beak is 3 to 4 inches long, so he can go really, really deep into the tree. So when you see evidence like this when you're out for a walk, you'll be like, oh, something's in that tree after the insects because the tree is dead. What kind of woodpecker could it be? Hairy, downy? If you see the really big holes, then you know it's the pileated woodpecker. And what's really cool about the pileated woodpecker, when you see evidence of him or her, is that that's an indicator of a healthy forest. So it's really, really nice to see those species coming back. And what I would say for somebody that doesn't know what a pileated woodpecker is, he's a big one. He's like Woody Woodpecker. He's and a nice red head, very, very beautiful beautiful bird to see. We'll stop here just for a minute. One thing that's very critical and important when you're out hiking, even on a trail that you know very well, is that you don't, I guess, assume that because it's been cold, -24 for 3 days, that I can just hop across this brook to get to the other side because there's something I want to see over there, there's whatever. Because as you can tell, this water, it comes up, it freezes, it goes down, it freezes. So the possibility that this ice is not froze is high. So really, my comment here would be beautiful, enjoy it, photography, do photography, but don't feel that it's something that you can cross safely and make it to the other side. Because this would be something that when you did fall in, with it being as cold as it is, we are close to the road, but just, again, one of those things that you want to be smart and not think that there's lots of places to skate and play on the ice, but a river like this that flows up and down is not one that you should play on. So here's another species that we'll show. It's actually a deciduous or hardwood species, and he's called a white birch. And as you can see, a lot of the bark has been pulled off at the bottom. A lot of people are putting little marks and so on in it. Luckily, it has an outer bark and an inner bark, so it can protect itself. But if you were camping or hiking, this is the type of material that I would have, and I do have actually in my pack. It's called birch bark, and it really is a good fire starter. But I would say, really, unless there's some on the ground or there's a lot of bark, you always just take very, very little. And you can see here that it's not only taking the bark, but they're putting marks on the tree, which will cause the tree stress, but the tree will try to grow it over and try to protect itself. So this is called a white birch, another predominant hardwood species in the Acadian forest. Leave no trace, we say, right? Other than your footprints and maybe the pictures that you take. So this is sort of pretty too to see, and again, another indicator when you're actually paying attention and aware of what is around you when you're out in the forest for a walk. So this is just obviously a small stream, a small brook, but it must have a feeder spring because it's still running, right? Cold water. So even though this is small and has water, doesn't mean that the big one that we looked at farther down, like you had said, doesn't have free water running under the ice. So, yeah,
I always learn so much when we go out with Heather, and hopefully we can have an in-person event soon so that you too can experience her infectious joy and childlike wonder for the forest. If you're out in the Dobson Trail and exploring anywhere in the Fundy Biosphere, send us a picture. See if you can ID some of these tree species. And bundle up, stay warm, and enjoy winter while it lasts. Before you know it, spring will be here.
What do we got?
Witch's Broom.
Good girl.
Created by squirrels, porcupines, birds.
Yep, they love to hide their food source in there.